Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Women Like Us. I am excited to have another conversation here with a group of ladies on a topic that's actually quite relevant. Just as a kickoff here, my name is Nancy John, but just in case you're tuning in for the first time, I am the co-founder and CEO of Seed Leadership. We are a leadership coaching and consultancy firm. I host these panel discussions that we have as part of Women Like Us. So I'm excited to have another conversation and bring forward another group of ladies here to have this discussion with. And we have some insightful and accomplished women joining the discussion today around the table. So I would love to have you ladies just do a quick introduction of yourselves and let everybody who's listening know who you are, what it is that you would want them to know about you. So Esther, I'll have you kick it off and then each of the other ladies can share a bit as well.
Hi to everybody out there in the viewer community and welcome back to season 2. This is now our episode 3 and I wanted to welcome you back and contribute to the forum. Now today, our cohort here is a representation of high-tech leaders. You all know me as a sales consultative leader in the high-tech industry in Canada. So I'll hand it over to Mercedes.
Hi, I'm Mercedes. Super excited to be here. I'm actually also in the high-tech industry, as Esther mentioned, and I lead a team of people who do a lot of sales in the energy industry. So we cover oil and gas, power and utilities, mining, and I live in Houston. In addition to that, I'm very active in the community, and I really specialize in helping connect people that typically are overlooked and provide them with resources, exposure to really be able to live their dreams. Thank you.
Marija.
I'm a manager and a consultant in the tech consulting space. And I've spent the last few years focused on various technologies, including AI and cloud. Started with a focus in healthcare, but since then have moved on to other groups within the public sector, as well as the financial services industry.
I'm a designer in high tech, and so I specialize in helping companies understand how their clients are understanding and adopting emerging technology, what the most relevant and important problems are to solve, and then helping that technology really connect with human beings in a way that's intuitive and seamless.
Well, everyone, we have an amazing group of women around the table, so I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today. Our topic for today is co-opetition. And so what that essentially is it's cooperation or cooperative competition. So it's the idea of a company or an organization who might be competitors deciding to actually say, hey, look, we're going to collaborate, we're going to cooperate on this specific initiative. And they do it for most organizations, the ultimate benefit is it's a mutual benefit to both of them, to their bottom line. And so it is an idea that exists and has existed actually for some time, but it's a conversation that's coming up more and more recently. So a really good example that's probably really relevant to all of us is the one between, so we've all been going through this COVID pandemic and hopefully we're coming on the tail end of that. And so both Pfizer and BioNTech, two very large pharmaceutical companies, made a decision back in March of 2020 and said, hey, look, the situation that we're in, we are now jointly going to work together in coming up with a vaccine for COVID-19. And so that was a co-opetition, like that was a collaboration between two competitors. And the benefit really on a global scale would be that when you have two very large organizations come together on something like this, it just made it possible to have fill the capacity needed, the manufacturing capacity to actually have a global vaccine available. In the high-tech space, co-opetition is quite common. And so the question I'd like to just open up for the panel here is, so if there are organizations like who consider themselves, like who deem themselves to be competition, how can we collaborate? Like how would those organizations collaborate around some joint causes? So let's actually look at it from the perspective of technology like blockchain or artificial intelligence. Like what would that look like? How could that be possible? So Marija, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on that?
What really forces some of these companies to actually set aside their differences and work together is our clients. So I think it's up to clients to kind of demand collaboration from competitors in the marketplace, because it's really in their best interest. I look at what my employer has to offer and what some of our strengths are, and I think we're great. I think we're great at what we do, We don't create products. We don't understand technology in the same way that somebody like, I'll take an IBM, for example, that has spent, decades and 100 years really focused on creating great assets. And so I think that if we want to really deliver value to our clients and solve a problem, wherever that problem might exist, I think the pandemic is a great one. So how do you get everybody in the country to be vaccinated and keep track of that in a single system? That's an issue that technology can solve. So we as a consulting company who really understand what it means to work with clients, how clients might think, what the end user might need. I think we're great from that consulting perspective, but we really deliver value when we partner with a technology company that actually knows how to deliver on the tech. I think sometimes we think that we can do everything, but if our clients force us to work with others, I think that's where real value comes from.
Call that forced collaboration, because I think that's honest as well to say, right? Like, it wasn't our idea to go to this right away.
We have our competitive point of views. We have overlaps in technology and offerings. However, there are subject matter expertise areas that in competencies that certain companies have well beyond others. And so there's a situation in my tenure in the 3.5 years that I was leading blockchain in a global context that we had to partner with our competitive systems integrators firm who was focused on auditing. It was really about understanding the aviation industry and looking at the supply chain. And so when you take a look at that specific use case scenario, you know that an airplane doesn't get just birthed and it becomes an airplane. There's a wing, there's an engine, there's a seat, there's a number of components, and they all get manufactured in different places around the globe, wherever there's expertise and materials are. And so as they come through the system and go through the journey of becoming a plane, if you think about it, there's different taxation laws on the piece component. And so our company had no understanding of how the taxation rules are as a piece part moves from that of China to that of Russia to that of Latin America to that of Canada and landing here in Bombardier in Quebec. And so as we collaborated together, we put our subject matter hats on where we understood blockchain from a business context and having that business ledger understand the immutability of all of the piece parts, where it comes from. And as a consortia of supply chain individuals or vendors, we don't necessarily need to know everything that is happening, but only the part in that journey where that becomes pertinent for this one company. And so as the journey for the piece part goes through the system, the consulting SI company was able to formulate the type of rules that taxation laws happen to be in that particular country or global market and apply that to the blockchain ledger so that as the piece part comes through, we worry about the technology on the blockchain, making sure it's hosted, secure, and that immutability is working, and that SI consulting firm who was worried about the business rules and the business logic on how to tax for that component as it goes through the supply chain system and in its journey to become a plane, that it carried that subject matter expertise. And so the two companies were collaborating to figure out what that service offering is for the benefit of all companies that need to be participant in that supply chain journey.
Good, because on an individual level, we always talk about you don't need to know everything. We always talk about as individuals the ability to collaborate. So to see it at a very high or very large enterprise level, I can only imagine like what goes into making that possible. Curious from Sarah and Mercedes, like what other ideas do you have around like that idea of how does co-opetition help us in a cause around technology, to improve technology?
What we're finding is, one, technology companies typically right now are doing very well financially. So that comes with some responsibility of what are we taking with the resources that we have to make this planet better for everyone. And so one area, even around sustainability, we have very complicated things to solve. And like an engineer, which I'm an engineer in my former life, I could solve it wonderfully on my own, but I really can take it to the next level by having partners. And so when we talk about carbon accounting and making sure that we are really measuring what we're putting out in the earth to, maybe damage the planet, we need to be held more responsible in using technology to make the world better. And doing that with partners is one area that we can help. Making sure that we have ethics in our AI, right? How are all of these pieces of the technology actually impacting or maybe damaging one part of our community, and holding everyone responsible for that?
If we were to look at it also with a social economic lens, not just because the example I gave about, Pfizer and BioNTech, like, yes, it helps a bigger picture, but 100% there was a bottom line initiative that started that.
When I talked about resources, it's also about giving equity and actually showing that in how we do business. And so one example I learned about recently is the Second Chance Business Coalition that actually has corporations and different people in tech as well coming together to say that if you happen to have a criminal history background, we are willing to commit that you are able to get a job at our organization. It's also like really practicing what you preach. And I think we have a lot more work to do in that area, but the more that we get people to have a co-opetition and things and make the world better for others, we're all better for it.
Mm-hmm. You think about things like, Mercedes talked about the Second Chance Coalition. She's mentioned about the, what is your responsibility when it comes to the carbon footprint that we're leaving? Like, what are we doing? What are we taking from the earth? So when we look at it from that perspective, like a socioeconomic perspective, Sarah, just your thoughts on what are your ideas, or what do you know about how co-opetition can be embedded a little bit more intentionally by organizations?
So glad you chose that word intentionally, because that's what, that's what design does, is we actually help design the outcome first. And Mercedes, you really, when you brought up AI damaging parts of community, that really got my attention, because I thought that's actually really true. And we need to acknowledge that. And then we need to set an intention for another outcome. Mm-hmm. And so when I think about, I like to, as I've been listening to you all, I've been hearing co-opetition actually as finding the partnership within that. So where are the shared values? What is the outcome that we want to have? And how are we going to frame this in such a way that everybody's making a contribution to something that really transcends any one organization? So blockchain transcends any one of those pieces. AI is a tough one, because I think that it can be something that sends us in a different direction, or we can use it to bring ourselves in a direction of intention. And so I would say, I think what's most important to me as a designer is really getting people together to let go of their own individual or organizational intentions. Keep that in the background, allow it to inspire you, know that it might be your wheelhouse and it's your contribution. But what's the bigger transcendent outcome that we want to have and that we can make together? When we set that intention, then we can all see how we fit into that, but we can find the intersections where we really create more than any one of us could do. Workshop, because it creates a really even playing field, and it allows people to communicate their ideas and intentions, and we're not stuck with the last voice that we heard, or the loudest voice in the room, or the person with the most power. It really allows great ideas to come forward so that we can then pick the one that's the most meaningful, or combine them together and really move forward with intention. And I want to bring up values. And that, I think that goes back to, in my mind, I'm seeing this connection between values and intention. When we think of values is really the thing that is underpinning, and that comes out in workshops, whether we say it or not. And I've actually taken a turn in my workshops and started making values really explicit. When we look at the things that people are putting on the board, what's the driver, what's the motivation, what are the values? And so when we can find those values that align, then we can actually build faster. We can be clear about the things that might get in our way. And I thought also about what Marija was saying with the two companies coming together, consultancy and a technology company that can build it. When you're looking at the value of the outcome being a happy user, or a new market that you're trying to build, or a new product line or something, being able to really understand what everybody gets out of that, and making sure that we care that everybody gets something. Mm-hmm. That everybody in the chain of events here, the end user all the way down to, all the way over to whoever the first person is in line is really aligned with the outcome and has a benefit for them, and that they agree with the benefit that they're working towards.
When I think of co-opetition and social good, I think the best example that comes to mind, and I hate to give him any more airtime, is really Tesla and Hertz. So, Tesla announced that they were going to provide Hertz with an entire fleet of electric vehicles. And if you think about global warming and one of the biggest contributors to carbon in the environment, it is cars. And so, do I think that it's because Elon Musk or Tesla is that they're all, bleeding green and really care about the environment? Not particularly. Like, I do think that their bottom line is the most important thing to them. But I'm sure that there is an incentive for them financially to want to invest in that. And you look at Hertz, same thing. Tesla, as a company that sells cars to people, goes against what Hertz is trying to do, where they're leasing out cars to their customers. They are getting kind of top of the line product there. And I think it's going to be vital for them to be able to survive, especially the post pandemic world. So that is a scenario, I think, where both of the companies are winning, and the world is also winning to a certain extent. I think in order to have more of that happen, we can't, and maybe I'm jaded, but I don't think we can just rely on there being enough people with great intentions or great values at the top who are just sort of pushing their ideas forward. I do think that there needs to be some form of a policy change or some incentives from the top that are driving those things more forcefully. So whether that means creating harsher, stricter penalties for companies and people not adhering to that, or giving people rewards for actually promoting some of that. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I think we need more of that.
If I think about the whole purpose of this Women Like Us even coming to be, I know Esther's vision was around, how do we increase women in tech? Like, that's something that's a passion that she has. So I know that, Marija, that's something that you and Esther have connected on as well. So I'd be curious to find out, what would that look like? How does that come to be when we think about co-opetition?
When you take a look at the means for us to be a change agent and figure out how to meet people where they are, take a look at the reality, folks. When we take a look at the intent for this forum was to mentor those behind us, the millennials, the Gen Z. Where are the Gen Z right now? When I take a look at my 11-year-old nephew and my godkids, they're all on their devices and their video games. Why couldn't we, from a co-opetition perspective, get together in this context of the 3D world of gaming and put that together with our education facility in this metaverse that we have been just recently hearing about, or omniverse, where we can take internet to another level? These kids in this generation, although they are stimulated by gaming devices, it doesn't mean that we just take that away from them. Where do we balance that out and converge together? And this could be an opportunity where all of our competitive companies, amongst all of us, thrive in this omniverse or this metaverse, come together. And why couldn't we create a forum where we have a high-tech, STEM-oriented conference, but in a game, right? How difficult it is to get all of our CEOs who we work for in one place at the same time. And then you wonder how many of the Gen Z would attend that. Do they have money? Do they have the ability to fly there? Is it a conference that they're actually welcome to convene it? But gaming opens up that environment, and that omniverse and metaverse says, just like the internet principles, everybody is equal. And so you come in that world, and whether you're an avatar and you deem yourself a certain persona, you can actually feel a little bit more included. This also takes away a lot of the barriers that people have in the second, third world nations. they could come together in this particular environment and contribute and gain and be in the cohort of executives and leaders. They could never be participatory on if it was a generic conference. And so I would just leave that with you and potentially add any other scenarios where you could see this co-opetition really formulating a new business model like this to get at the younger generation now and today.
I really love the changing of the boundaries, the permeating of making them all permeable, and it levels the playing field.
If you're not making it equitable and making people feel included, like you said, Esther, as well, like there's no point of having it, right? The environment needs to be welcoming. So I think that most of our leaders in our tech companies are preparing for the metaverse and what it looks like for them and how we will be working differently.
We can do a lot more, even if we don't think about our technology offerings that we have, and just come together as organizations who care. If I can just put it as layman terms as that, to really come together and really fuel equal equilibrium in girls in STEM. This has been an issue that almost is so redundant and repetitive that sometimes people just see it as either noise or it's so redundant that it doesn't get to the heart of people that we need to actually make some change. In 2020 to 2021, you still see, and this might be somewhat enamoring for people, that countries like Serbia, countries like Georgia are beating out North America for girls in STEM. And so, not to say anything bad about the emerging global markets, that's kudos to them, but we should look at what they're doing and figure out what are the emerging markets doing that's making the shift.
Sure, I kind of chuckle when you mention some countries in more of the developing or emerging space that have been doing better, and it comes down to, unfortunately, capitalism just isn't the same over there as it is here in North America, and people see things like diversity, equality, and inclusion as a cost, and they look at women and, well, how much can I squeeze out of an employee if they're a female versus a male? Women go on maternity leave. They're, viewed as caring more about the family, not being 100% in their work environment. So that's a loss or a cost for me from a business perspective. So I think until there's rules in place and there are strict punishments in place if you don't actually follow those rules, I think until it's a political level where they just say companies who fail to do this pay X amount per year, or their CEOs don't get their year-end bonuses if they fail to adhere to this. Maybe we would actually see a change in some of these actions. And where money in places like Serbia, yes, it's important, but we don't have the same capitalist market that exists here in North America, and that's been so entrenched and ingrained in how people think and how they behave.
In the last year or two, we've had to, from top all the way down, every single person has to talk about what they're doing in DEI in their performance review. And it's just interesting how that behavior shifted, because whether you really cared about it or not, you had to show and prove, yes, I have exhibited some type of impact in that area. And so I think that's just one little small tweak, but it really has made an impact, because for me, I had 20 things to list, right? Because that's what I do every day. But for someone else, they were like, what is it that I can do? And they're looking and searching, like, how can I be better? And though it is sort of this, they talk about the carrot versus the stick, but eventually I think it will make you change behavior. And that's just the only way we can finally get everyone to be on the same page. So I like that suggestion.
Fantastic to hear. That actually means that there's some movement that's actually happening. That's not just talk, it is walk, and walking the talk is very important. By changing the scorecard items, we have to do that. That is something that I believe is inevitable, that we need to do that now and not 10 years from now.
Make it an explicit business initiative like the company I work for today. There's help then for people who don't know what they're looking for. So for example, the unconscious bias training that we went through, that opened a lot of eyes, and people were able then to identify things that they were doing in themselves or not doing, and then ask for help. And it made it okay to ask for help, for people to say, I didn't realize that I was doing this. And that was actually part of the championship program that I was in, when I said to my mentor, why are you teaching me how to act like you so that the rest of you can see and hear me? I act like me, and I've opened doors and I've built businesses that have become extremely lucrative, and not by myself, but mostly because I really like to collaborate with people. And when you get ideas together, then they kind of take off. But that wasn't the culture at the time. And he said, oh, wow, I didn't see the world that way. Now that you've told me, I can use that information with my peers, and we can talk about what are we expecting from people? How do we create a place where they can come to work and be their organic selves? But if it weren't a safe place in the company to talk about that, to ask for help, to be able to say, look, I have this measurable result, which implies I didn't do something great before, but now I changed.
There's a need to have something externally motivating or driving. So whether that's a carrot or a stick. So we've talked about punitive, there's punitive measures that can be taken. There's policies that get put into place. There is, reality is we do what we get measured on doing. That is just how we as humans, we operate that way. So tying it to performance measures, trying it to, what sort of bonus you can get at the end for executives. So all of those things are carrots and sticks. But we also realize that for something to be sustainable, there has to be an internal desire and a drive. But for what I'm hearing from the group here is like, it may not be where we start. It's just, the reality is that may just not be, everybody sitting around the table may not feel the same way. So Sarah, you talked about the example of the leader who was leading your group. And he was like, is this really what we need to talk about? And I think this shows up. I think the challenge is that anyone who is not, if you're not experiencing the issue, it will never, you just can't, it's just difficult to see it. And I want to just highlight that for those listening is that it can also be a bit discouraging, because that is the long haul of a conversation. That is not now we've come up with the silver bullet of a conversation and an idea, let's all take it back. But that's an encouragement, because hearing all of you talk, each of you have talked about very specific things that either you or your organizations are doing, and you're in large organizations. So I think it's an encouragement point to know that it is happening. It may not always seem right away, but it is something that's going on. So I kind of want to say that as an encouragement to people who are listening in. It's just at a high level, we've touched here around this is what's possible. The question always becomes, great, so how? So for example, the women in tech conversation, Esther, you mentioned, it's not a new conversation. It's something, I don't even know how many years it's been going on. The question becomes how. So I've heard a few things. You talked about a change in desire, this change in policy. I mean, these things exist. So what's the block?
I think on the how, that's the hardest part, right? So I think we can have ideals of what we'd like to be. And one thing that really stands out is truly practicing inclusivity. Mm-hmm. And we can get the girls interested, we can get women interested, but if they get in these environments that are also, not challenged to change their culture and accepting different people, then they won't stay. Right. And so one thing that I will commend my company and my organization, and I've seen over the years, is we recognize when a certain department or a certain group of people are made to feel not included, and we punish people for that. And so it becomes very pervasive that people know they can't stay if they're going to mistreat people based on whatever the difference is. Right? We made our DE&I conference open to our clients, open to anyone that was welcome to attend, and gave them the opportunity to be able to provide feedback and forums to have these discussions about how do we continue the how. So it really is a top-down approach, quite frankly, that shows and says, listen, this type of behavior won't be accepted. We want to make sure that people, whether they have different thoughts, they have different, whatever it is, that they are included. And so once people start seeing that they will be, they can lose their job just based on the behavior, I definitely think the behaviors and environments will change.
I agree 100% with Mercedes, with what you just said, because company culture means so much, and women can be educated and still not get the job. And Stanford has done some incredible research and education around unconscious bias. And simply the knowledge that well, I'll say the more positive one. When the names and the genders and all of those things were taken off submissions and resumes and things like that, suddenly people were measured in an equal way. Everyone take a look at that research, go to Stanford, Google Stanford unconscious bias. The company I work for today does that training, and it blew my mind and it blew my socks off. And I see it day to day. We specifically hold ourselves and each other accountable for being very clear about making sure everyone has an opportunity to talk. Who's in the room? Let's take a look and make sure that we have representation before we move forward. And the company I work for today also does what's called a championship program, and they're doing this specifically for people in diverse populations. I happen to be considered a diverse population in the area of technology that I work in because I'm a woman and I'm older. So it was really interesting when I got my champion, and I spent a lot of my career helping companies change culture and understanding motivation and behavior choices and things like that. So I waited an appropriate amount of time. And then I said, this mentorship program, I'm not the one that needs to be mentored. And I'm not saying that because I'm arrogant and I think I know everything, but we're not trying to change a dynamic I contributed to creating. How do we turn this around? How do we get to the place where, and I'm going to quote a gentleman from a previous job where I was working with a team of women, and we were trying to get women's contributions to be recognized, because the higher up we were trying to go, the less women there were. And we were very, very surprised at that, because the words were there, but the activity wasn't there. So we created this event, and we were trying to get the approval and agreement and support of the general manager, who's a man. And he said, when it comes to like women's issues, it just feels icky. I just get an ick inside of me. Why can't we just talk about the outcome? Why can't we talk about the business outcome? And I said, because we can't get it. We can't create the culture that allows us to move into those roles. And so I know that the question was not, I'm kind of taking it in a bit of a turn, Nancy, but I think we can do all the education and support and love of women in STEM, but there are measured, demonstrable areas in women's careers where they drop out. And I think that is probably the case for other diverse populations. And I feel like that's really the issue, is how do we get the power structure to change?
I know here in Canada, at least, they're trying to be a little bit more strict or cracking down on individuals who don't have workforces that are more diverse. So our company in general, they have a policy. They have to have 50-50 female male leadership at the top, and like that's just a rule that they have to adhere to. So it's up to them to figure out how to address that.
Gotcha. I have one final question back to the topic of co-opetition. I'm curious, and this is part of, for those who have listened to our show before, this is where we get into the gotcha question. So this is a question the folks around the table haven't had a chance to really maybe think about ahead. What I would like to know is the flip side of it. I'd like to know, what are the drawbacks to co-opetition?
Not having a clear goal, not having a clear outcome. And often when you're doing this kind of co-opetition work, you can find that it morphs a little bit. When I was working at a previous company I worked at, we did a lot of blockchain work, and there was an expectation of what it was going to be like. And then we found that, your partnership is really critical. So now we have to set a really crisp goal around what partnership. How does that work? How do people benefit? And the ability to communicate that as we went. And I saw times when that didn't happen, and things just got kind of watered down, and there was a general malaise, and nobody really knew why they were doing what they were doing. So keeping that spark, being crisp, being clear, having those values so that people don't get frustrated. Frustration also can damage trust in the initiative and in the leadership too. And that can be an outcome that happens down the line, which is really problematic because it's very difficult to rebuild.
It's important for us to consider what the drawbacks are, because then you can actually plan for it.
Sometimes when organizations in particular look at co-opetition or why they might want to form an alliance with somebody else, the target or the goal that you always have in mind is increasing profits. And oftentimes when that's the case, there's usually one of the two that ends up profiting more than the other. And I think being aware that it's really not all about profits, and maybe thinking about what is it that both of these organizations can sort of gain from each other, whether it's a transference of skills. So trying to find that mutually beneficial, like win-win, looking beyond just profits, and trying to find out how you can actually emerge from it stronger is important.
Similar in the sense of when we think about co-opetition, typically it's a shift in energy. And so we maybe have created what normally would be a boundary, or, you know, we don't really collaborate with this particular organization. Those barriers come down, and then you have this momentum. And what I've seen is similar to what Marija said. Sometimes when there's something comes up, maybe this competitor now is encroaching a little bit more on your space than initially, and now that person becomes the enemy, then you lose the momentum of what you were working on together. And I just think that the people that you bring along with that, they get frustrated.
Just to wrap it up, I want to disrupt everybody and say one thing, which is I believe the lack of co-opetition is futile. I believe everything that you have said individually is key to consider. However, things that we experience today, like the internet, would not have become a viable source of information and data that we cannot live with today. As much as we can't live without water, we can't live without the internet unless it was for co-opetition.
Well, because a lot of times the ideas for to make the world a better place come from people who are sitting in our chairs, and perhaps we should engage folks who are going to be here 50 years from now, when I think, at least I feel I'll be gone. Yeah. I think about my nieces and my nephews, like it's the world for them. So perhaps even if it's the idea that you talked about, Esther, is like, what is the idea that they have? And maybe we engage sooner than later and not assume that they don't know. They know what they like and they know what they don't like. So at a minimal thing, we can engage in that way. So those are some ways that I think we've missed in the past, engaging the voice of the folks that we are looking to bring on board. We generally don't ask them. And I think there's an opportunity just as simply as to ask people. Well, ladies, I want to say thank you. This has been a fantastic conversation. I have to say I've learned so much from just hearing each of you talk from your own perspectives. It's really amazing to see how you're individually involved in the work that we do. And to everybody who's been listening, thank you for joining us. You're welcome to share your comments, your questions in the comments below in a specific topic. Please feel free to jot that down. We'd be happy to bring that forward in future conversations. So thank you again to each of you, and thank you for everybody for joining us today.